A warm welcome to you here at THEKI, your podcast for consciousness, health, and happiness. I'm glad you're here. I'm Sandra, and today we're going to talk about the 12 dimensions and your light body process. Yes, I've been circling around this topic for quite some time, and in my seminars and books, I've repeatedly mentioned the 12 or even 13 dimensions, and have also reported extensively on the light body process. But I've never really explained the dimensions and their connections to the light body process in detail, or let's say, only rarely. In fact, there are different systems and possibilities, and I want to summarize them here for you in a way that's reasonably easy to understand, because I know how difficult it can sometimes be to reconcile physical concepts with spiritual ones, and many people just drop out at that point. Let's start with the theoretical part, that is the physics, before we move on to the practical part, which specifically concerns you in your human experience and on your soul's journey. With this knowledge, you can move through your life much more consciously and freely and see more clearly where you are right now, strongly influencing your vibration and, of course, your perception of reality. And ultimately, that's what it's always about for me in everything I put out. It's about the realization or the remembrance of your true divine self. And to uncover that more and more, so that through this freedom, you can tune into completely new desired realities. So it's never really about the theory, even though that's where we're starting now. It's always about applying it in your own life, but it often makes sense to start with the theory so that through those aha moments, yes, you develop something like an intrinsic motivation to put it into practice. When we understand what the purpose is, we naturally approach it differently. All right, let's get started. How many dimensions are there? So you've probably already heard, maybe even from me, that there's this idea of 12 or even 13 dimensions. But that doesn't come from classical physics. It's more from certain models in modern physics, like string theory or M theory, which I'll get to in a moment, or from esoteric or spiritual concepts. And to provide clarity, it's important to distinguish between scientific theory and spiritual interpretations. In classical physics, according to Newton and Einstein, there are 4 dimensions. 3 spatial dimensions, that is length, width, and height, and 1 time dimension, the classic linear flow of time as we perceive it. So that makes 4 dimensions as formulated by classical physics. Beyond that, there is string theory and also M theory, and in these it is assumed that there are more than 4 dimensions. In string theory, there are up to 10 dimensions, and in M theory, even 11 dimensions. And it is generally said that these additional dimensions are rolled up or compactified. That's why we don't perceive them in everyday life. And that, of course, comes very close to the truth because, of course, we mainly move within the visible realm of 3D and 4D, and everything beyond that we perceive more through our feelings, our extrasensory abilities, and so on. And that's also how you can explain it, just as string theory or M theory tries to do. Interestingly, the German physicist Burkart Heim, who is already quite well known, also assumed that only a multidimensional space-time model can describe all natural forces and phenomena. And that's exactly what he described in his theory, which is extremely complex. He really went into detail, incorporating gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, but also phenomena like consciousness or near-death experiences into the dimensions, thereby practically constructing a 12-dimensional model. As mentioned, his theory is extremely, extremely complex. So I could never possibly cover all of that in a podcast. And it was also never fully accepted in the mainstream. But some physicists found it very appealing, for example, Elo Brandt and von Ludwiger, who also tried to further develop these theories. You could say that the Heim theory is interdisciplinary. So it essentially connects multiple levels. It links natural science, metaphysics, and consciousness research, and thus, of course, goes far beyond conventional models. So, and then there is also the theory of the 13 dimensions, which originates from metaphysical concepts, that is, spiritual or esoteric teachings. These 13 dimensions are usually described as levels of consciousness or existence, but these levels have less to do with space and time in the physical sense, and more with states of consciousness, energy levels, soul planes, and the multidimensional self. The spiritual 13-dimension model essentially describes different levels of existence, and also of the energy of consciousness, which one passes through or can experience in the process of development. That is, from the densest level of matter all the way to the source of all being, the divine source. And yes, these dimensions are often described as a journey of ascension or a return to unity, as I also do, that is, from the separation of 3D through all the dimensions back to the source, which is then 13D. So, and now we come to the part of this podcast that I actually want to get to, because if you know my books, Involution and Soul Power, and if you've generally listened to my podcasts a bit, especially those about the ascension process, then you know that I deal intensively with the multidimensionality of us awakening humans. Of course, THEKI can be a very, very important part in helping us free ourselves here, because we all have these multidimensional abilities. They are usually just capped, and these layers we've built around ourselves tune us into the 3D, 4D reality, even though there is actually so much more. When we free ourselves from these layers, it means that suddenly we perceive 5D, we perceive 6D, we perceive 7D, and so on. And I already mentioned in my book Involution that very early on I came across a book, a really esoteric one called The Light Body Process, in which the author Tashira Tashirin describes the transformation through 12 levels of the light body. And I find that really makes a lot of sense to connect these stages of development with the dimensions as well. So in this transformation, we are essentially experiencing an inner ascension, our own light body process, during which DNA, chakras, cells, emotions, belief systems, and so much more are changing. In 12 stages, and that is very similar to what she writes, which I also explain extensively in my seminars and books. What's interesting is that we can connect the 12 light body stages with the classic dimensional levels, which takes us from theory into practice. So you can imagine the dimensions as maps to start with, and the light body process is the experience that guides us through them. So we can really work wonderfully with this. And now I just want to briefly explain these different stages to you in connection with the dimensions. Yes, I think this is actually something that's easier to read. You might be able to absorb it better that way than by listening, but I will do my best to explain it clearly. So the first 3 stages, light body stages 1 to 3, this corresponds to our 3D reality, that is the 3rd dimension. It is physically structured, but we already have a certain orientation because we are in the process. All souls are in the process of transitioning from 3D to higher fields, so it's not intended for us to stay here forever. In 3D, one often feels a certain hopelessness, powerlessness, a density and heaviness, and also fear. Many people are afraid as long as they are in 3D. It is a purely material consciousness, and when you think purely in material terms, you always have a lot to lose. And then you might also be afraid of aging, of illness, and so on, of existential losses, lack in any form. And through this fear, a certain control over us is also possible. But we also start to control ourselves, to control others, to want to control life. And all of this is, of course, something we absolutely need to outgrow for more freedom, happiness, and awareness. Then there are the light body stages 4 to 6, and this is, so to speak, the transition from 4D to 5D. And as you probably already know, I have described these 3D, 4D, 5D dimensions in great detail in my books and also in some podcasts, with everyday examples and everything that goes with it. So feel free to listen to those again if you're not quite familiar with it yet, because it's really useful and important for our daily lives to be able to classify certain things much more easily. So stages 4 to 6 also refer to the transition from 4D to 5D. This means that our mental and emotional levels are being addressed, and we are right in the middle of the process. We haven't made it through yet in these stages, but rather we have a lot of work to do. And right now, many people are in this transition. Maybe you are too if you listen to podcasts like this. That simply means working through karma. You connect more and more with your higher self. The heart also opens more and more, but may close again from time to time, simply because not everything has been resolved yet that would keep it open. First experiences of unity, maybe even experiences of bliss, but you also keep falling out of them again. Very intense dreams, emotions, deep emotions, old emotions that come up as well, shadow work, questioning everything, suddenly questioning all the systems of the matrix. Like, I don't want to be part of that anymore. They weren't honest with us. Watching different shows, subscribing to different channels, all of that is part of 4D. Yes, all the work of gaining insight, which keeps moving us forward step by step, even if sometimes it looks like we're going backwards. A strong activation of the psychic senses begins in this phase, yes. So all of this characterizes stages 4 to 6. So and once you've made it through those from stage 7 to about 9, we're already in 5 to 7D. And I know I've always only talked about 5D, and that's absolutely enough, because when we all arrive in 5D, we'll all truly be somewhere completely different, and then the world will be at peace. And it's really not as far away as it sometimes seems. Just leave the TV off, focus on your own process, and then you'll get a sense of how quickly something like this can happen if everyone does it, if many people do it. So 5 to 7D means a strong increase in vibration within you. You stabilize yourself more and more in your light body, and you also connect your light body, physical body, and crystal body more and more. You become increasingly aware of your multidimensional self. You develop it more and more. You identify less and less with your incarnated part, like your name, address, and so on. That's how it is now, and that's wonderful, but you know that you are much more than that. You are in creator consciousness. You have activated your soul plan, a very deep, continuous feeling of love from which you no longer fall out, which simply becomes the foundation, the basis for all relationships, all actions, for everything. You feel a very deep connection, a very deep peace within you that nothing can truly disturb anymore. Maybe on the surface, but not deep down. And maybe now, based on this summary, you can already see that 5D, 6D, and 7D can practically be reached at the same time, because all of this is very interconnected, and there really is little difference in the light body stages. There are 1 or 2 processes, but basically from the point where you've made the transition from 4D to 5D, everything becomes very smooth, very easily accessible. Many people have already arrived in 5D to 7D, even today. Yes, and for the next and final stages, there is then another big leap. I have to say, not many people currently incarnated have reached that yet. These are the light body stages 10 to 12 and the dimensions 8 to 12. At different levels of divine consciousness, your own will gradually dissolves more and more. into the essence of unity. So you even move beyond creator consciousness because everything simply is, and there is no longer any reason to create at a certain frequency. Everything creates itself. Transformation now takes place into the divine self, meaning truly into your deepest divine being. Your light body is fully activated, and all that remains is the return to unity, to the primordial source. But you are already living unity, connectedness, love, yet stages 10 to 12 are still active stages, meaning something is still happening there. And what no one describes anymore, neither Tashira in her book nor anywhere else you can read about it, is the 13th. And my interpretation is that the 13th dimension is simply beyond all stages of development. The description of the light body stages ends with the 12th stage. Likewise, the physically formulated concepts of dimensions also end at the latest with the 12th dimension. The 13th dimension can be understood as that which lies beyond polarity and beyond the individual self. So you dissolve again into pure being, into the source, into the divine primordial consciousness. And this state is no longer oriented toward development. It's no longer about returning to the source. Rather, it is the pure consciousness of the source. That is the difference. You are not returning, you simply are. You always were. And everything else has always been an illusion. And I find that very interesting because I have been following various concepts for a long time. And I keep noticing that the number 12 often describes what we are able to describe. And then there is a 13th, a quality that can't quite be described or doesn't fully belong, but ultimately unites everything within itself. Or rather, yes, 12 main components, and the 13th is always the all-one, which unites the 12 qualities within itself, or without which the 12 qualities wouldn't even be possible. For example, Jesus and the 12 apostles. In Jesus, everything was united. The 12 apostles represented certain archetypes, embodied certain qualities. Jesus was everything. The 13th, or also the 12 zodiac signs which circle around the sun. The 13th. Or according to our calendar, we have 12 months that determine our year, that shape our daily lives. In a way, they also determine our daily bread because we plan and calculate with them and so on. But actually, there are 13 moons in a year. And then we have 12 chakras. I know there are different concepts, but according to the chakra teachings, the Atlantean chakra system, which I also perceive, support, and teach, the 13 is also the source. We have 12 chakras within us through which we evolve upwards. And the 12th chakra is the stargate, the gate to the source. But only the 13th is the source. And then, for example, in several ancient primordial traditions, there is the concept of 12 primordial qualities, archetypes. And also in the ancient mysteries, which I unfortunately do not yet fully but quite well remember, there were these 12 mysteries. Yes, I know that was a lot and yet not much in a short time. I hope that I was able to bring you a lot of clarity about how we can unite all of this within ourselves. I know it was also very theoretical, and often not everything can really be put into words. That's why I thought about recording a meditation, because experience always surpasses knowledge. Experience always surpasses theory. And that's why I want to invite you now to join me right after this for my meditation, the journey through the 13 light body levels. This way you can experience the dimensions and the associated light body levels for yourself. And you'll notice exactly what is already familiar to you and where you are right now. And yes, beyond that, you can get a feel for the different levels, look around, sense them, let yourself fall into them, and maybe also notice, oh yes, that seems familiar to me, and this part I don't know yet, I haven't integrated it yet, it's not quite part of my conscious self. Because ultimately, your soul is always at home in all dimensions. For you, it's simply about remembering again. And also accepting all the upgrades from the different dimensions that are available for you. And so in this process, more and more genetics are gradually activated within you. More and more DNA is unlocked, and with increasingly active genetics, as I have often spoken and written about, you naturally have completely different perceptions, completely different possibilities. As you've heard, you really step fully into your creator consciousness and even beyond that. And so, yes, I can only invite you, become what you have always been, a multidimensional divine being that has simply reduced its consciousness to certain levels of experience in order to have specific experiences, but can now also release everything again. Are you in? I'm looking forward to it.